The blood-red sunset painted the Montana sky as Samantha Fletcher stood on her porch, the telegram trembling in her hand. Father dead, bank foreclosing. Return immediately. 4 years at finishing school in Boston, only to come back to nothing but dust and debt. It was 1875, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, especially to a woman alone. The ranch that had been her childhood home now looked worn and neglected. The cattle her father had once proudly raised were down to a meager herd, and the hands had left when the money stopped coming. Samantha wiped the dust from her face as she surveyed what was left of the Fletcher spread. 20 years her father had built this place, and now, just 3 weeks after burying him, she was about to lose it all. Miss Fletcher. The deep voice startled her, and she turned to see a tall man on horseback approaching the house. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. Name's Yates Fairfield, your neighbor to the north. Mr. Fairfield, Samantha acknowledged, straightening her back despite her exhaustion. She'd heard her father mention the Fairfield ranch, a successful operation that had been expanding steadily over the past few years. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. Up close, she could see his eyes piercing blue and assessing. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Eastern men she'd known in Boston, but there was something compelling about his weathered face and quiet confidence. I was sorry to hear about your father, he said, removing his hat. He was a good man. Thank you. Samantha clutched the telegram tighter. Did you know him well? Well enough to know he wouldn't want his daughter facing the bank alone. Yates gestured toward the paper in her hand. Word travels fast around these parts. Banker Simmons is coming tomorrow, isn't he? Samantha nodded, too tired to wonder how he knew or to pretend everything was fine. Yes, though I don't see what good it will do. According to this, my father borrowed heavily against the property. There's no way I can repay it. Yates studied her for a long moment. I might have a proposition for you, Miss Fletcher, one that could save your ranch. I'm listening, Mr. Fairfield. I need a wife. His direct statement knocked the breath from her, and you need a financial partner. I'm willing to pay off your father's debts and invest in restoring this place to what it was. Samantha stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You're proposing marriage to a woman you've just met. It wouldn't be the first practical marriage in these parts. His expression remained serious. I need someone to help run my household and eventually raise a family. You need someone to save this land. It could be mutually beneficial. Samantha turned away, her mind racing. She'd returned to Montana expecting to settle her father's affairs and perhaps sell what was left of the ranch. Marriage had been far from her thoughts, especially to a rugged cowboy she'd just met. I don't even know you, Mr. Fairfield. You know I can save your father's legacy, he countered, and you can get to know me after. I'm offering you a solution, Miss Fletcher, one that keeps you on your land. And what if I refuse? Then I wish you luck with Banker Simmons tomorrow. He's not known for his compassion. Yates placed his hat back on his head. I'll return in the morning before he arrives. Think about it. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Samantha staring after him, the wild proposition echoing in her mind. That night, sleep evaded her. The familiar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind whistling through the eaves only emphasized how alone she was. Boston had been an adventure, but this land was in her blood. The thought of strangers living in her family home, working her family's land, made her heart ache. At dawn, Samantha stood on the porch again, this time dressed in her best dress navy blue with a modest bustle, the only remaining nice garment she hadn't sold to pay for her journey home. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her chestnut hair, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Yates arrived before the banker, as promised. This time he wore a clean shirt and had shaved his stubble. He looked different, still rugged, but more intentional. Behind him rode 2 men she assumed were from his ranch. Have you considered my offer, Miss Fletcher? He asked, staying mounted on his horse. I have, Samantha replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I have conditions. A glimmer of respect crossed his face. I expected nothing less. This remains Fletcher land, held in trust alongside any Fairfield holdings. I want that in writing. She took a deep breath. And I need to know your intentions are honorable. I won't be treated as property. Yates nodded. You'll be my wife in every legal sense with all the protections that entails. As for the land, I agree to your terms. I don't need your property, Miss Fletcher. I need a partner. One more thing." Samantha stepped closer to his horse. "I want a proper courtship after the marriage. I can't promise to love you, Mr. Fairfield, but I won't live as a stranger to my husband." For the first time, she saw a hint of a smile on his face. "That's fair." He dismounted and approached the porch steps. "Do we have an agreement?" The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted them. Banker Simmons had arrived, his round face already set in a look of smug satisfaction as he saw the run-down state of the ranch. "Miss Fletcher," Simmons called out, tipping his hat insincerely, "I trust you've come to terms with your situation." Before Samantha could respond, Yates stepped forward. "Mr. Simmons, good morning. I believe there's been a change in circumstances you should be aware of." The banker's eyes narrowed. "Fairfield, what business do you have here?" "I'm about to marry Miss Fletcher," Yates announced, his voice carrying across the yard, "and I'm prepared to settle her father's debts in full today." Simmons sputtered, his face reddening. "This is highly irregular. There are procedures, there are banknotes," Yates cut in. "And I have the funds to pay them. Unless you'd prefer I take my business to the bank in Helena." The threat worked. Within an hour, papers were signed, debts were settled, and Banker Simmons departed with considerably less smugness than he'd arrived with. The moment his wagon disappeared down the road, Samantha felt her knees weaken. "Are you all right?" Yates asked, catching her elbow to steady her. "I just sold myself into marriage to save a ranch," she whispered, the reality of what she'd done hitting her all at once. "No," Yates corrected her gently. "You saved your family's legacy and gained a partner. There's no shame in that." One of Yates's men approached, a slight, wiry fellow with a kind face. "Boss, we should head back if we're gonna fetch the preacher today." "Today," Samantha gasped. "Unless you need more time," Yates said, studying her face. "But the sooner we make this official, the fewer questions people will ask." Samantha swallowed hard. "Today is fine." The wedding, if it could be called that, happened that very evening. The local preacher, a friend of Yates's, rode out to the Fletcher ranch. The only witnesses were Yates's two ranch hands and Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who'd come to pay respects after hearing of Samantha's return. Samantha wore the same navy dress and had picked wildflowers from the meadow behind the house for a makeshift bouquet. As she stood beside Yates, repeating vows to a man she'd known less than 24 hours, tears welled in her eyes. They weren't entirely tears of sadness, there was relief there too, and fear, and a desperate hope that she'd made the right decision. As the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates turned to her, noticing the tears slipping down her cheeks. Instead of embarrassment or awkwardness, his expression softened. He reached up with a calloused thumb to gently wipe away a tear. "You'll never cry alone again," he said softly, for her ears only. It wasn't a romantic declaration, but something in his voice, a promise, a commitment, made her breath catch. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Fairfield," she whispered back. "Yates," he corrected her. "I reckon you should use my given name now." "Yates," she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. "And I'm Samantha." That night, after the preacher and witnesses had gone, an awkward silence fell over the house. Yates had sent his men back to his ranch with instructions to return in the morning with supplies and hands to begin work on the Fletcher place. "I'll take the back room," he said, picking up his saddlebag. "You keep your father's room." Samantha nodded, grateful and confused all at once. "That's considerate of you." "I meant what I said about a proper courtship." He stood awkwardly in the hallway. "We did things backward, but that doesn't mean we can't do the rest right." In the days that followed, the Fletcher ranch began to transform. Yates brought over a dozen men to repair fences, mend the barn roof, and begin preparations for increasing the cattle herd. He was gone from dawn to dusk most days, returning only for the evening meal Samantha prepared. Their conversations were stilted at first, two strangers trying to navigate a relationship that had legally skipped all the usual stages. But slowly, over dinners and brief moments on the porch in the evening, they began to learn about each other. Samantha discovered that Yates had come west as a boy with his father after losing his mother to influenza. He'd built his ranch from nearly nothing after his father was killed in a dispute over water rights 10 years ago. He was educated surprisingly so for a rancher, having spent winters reading whatever books he could get his hands on. Yates, in turn, learned about Samantha's years in Boston, her love of music and literature, and her complicated relationship with her father who had sent her east after her mother's death, unable to raise a daughter alone. "Did you have a beau in Boston?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Samantha smiled faintly. "There was a professor's son who showed interest, but nothing serious. What happened? He discovered I was a rancher's daughter from Montana Territory. Suddenly, I wasn't quite sophisticated enough for Boston society." She shrugged. "It was for the best. I never really belonged there. And do you belong here?" Yates asked, his eyes searching her face. "With a husband you didn't choose?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. "I'm beginning to think I might," she admitted finally, "though I reserve the right to change my mind." That earned her the rare sight of his full smile, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. Fair enough. As the weeks passed, spring bloomed across the Montana landscape, and with it, a tentative companionship between the unlikely couple. Yates began teaching Samantha about the business side of ranching, something her father had never bothered to do, and she found she had an aptitude for figures and planning that surprised them both. "You should have been running this place years ago," Yates commented one day as they reviewed the books. "Your father made some poor decisions." "He was grieving," Samantha defended, though she knew Yates was right. "After my mother died, it was like he lost his way." "Grief can do that to a man," Yates acknowledged, and something in his tone made Samantha wonder if he was speaking from experience. The question of their sleeping arrangements remained unchanged. Yates in the back room, Samantha in her father's old room. But something was shifting between them, a current of awareness that hadn't been there before. It came to a head on a stormy night in late May. A sudden squall had blown in from the mountains, catching Yates and several hands out on the range. Samantha paced the house, peering anxiously through windows streaked with rain, jumping at every crack of thunder. When the door finally burst open, Yates stood there, drenched and muddied, his expression grim. "Are you hurt?" Samantha rushed forward, relief and concern mingling. "No, but we lost 3 calves in a flash flood," he said, removing his dripping hat. "The men are taking care of the rest of the herd." Without thinking, Samantha began helping him remove his sodden coat. "You need to get warm. I'll heat water for a bath." Yates caught her hands, stilling them. "Samantha," the way he said her name like it was something precious made her look up. His blue eyes were intense, searching hers with a question she wasn't sure how to answer. "I was worried," she admitted softly, "about the cattle, about you." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Yates's hands tightened around hers, and for a moment, Samantha thought he might kiss her. Instead, he released her with gentle reluctance. "I should get cleaned up," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Later that night, after Yates had bathed and changed, Samantha brought him a cup of coffee as he sat by the fire staring into the flames. "I never asked why you wanted to marry," she said, settling in the chair opposite him. "You said you needed a wife, but why me? Why then?" Yates took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I've been watching your father's ranch decline for years. I offered to help him more than once, but he was too proud." He set the cup down. "When I heard you'd returned and were about to lose everything, it seemed like a solution to both our problems." "What was your problem?" Samantha pressed. He met her gaze steadily. "Loneliness." The simple admission struck her. In all their conversations, Yates had never been so direct about his feelings. "I've built something good," he continued. "A successful ranch, respect in the territory, but I come home to an empty house every night. That's no way to live a life. And you thought a stranger would fill that void." "I thought a partner might." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "And you weren't entirely a stranger, Samantha. I knew your father. I watched you ride out to the meadows when you were younger before you went east. You always seemed strong, different." Samantha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You noticed me back then. It would have been hard not to." His lips quirked in a half smile. "You were the only girl around who could outride most of the cowboys." The revelation that he'd been aware of her years before their marriage shifted something in Samantha's understanding of their arrangement. It hadn't been as impulsive as she'd thought, at least not on his part. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of tension built between them. When lightning struck nearby, the crash of thunder rattling the windows, Samantha jumped, and Yates was beside her in an instant. "It's just the storm," he reassured her, his hand covering hers. "I know," she said, but didn't pull away. Yates, whatever she had been about to say was lost as the front door crashed open. One of the ranch hands stood there, rain pouring off his slicker. "Boss, the creek's overflowing, heading straight for the lower pasture. We need to move those cattle now." Yates was on his feet immediately. "I'll be right there." He turned to Samantha. "Stay inside, it's too dangerous out there." Before she could protest, he was gone, back into the stormy night. But this time, Samantha didn't just worry, she acted. Changing quickly into riding clothes and grabbing her own slicker, she followed. The scene at the creek was chaos. The normally placid stream had become a raging torrent, and a group of cattle was trapped on a rapidly shrinking island of land as the waters rose around them. Yates and his men were attempting to create a pathway using ropes and their horses, but the current was too strong. "Samantha," Yates shouted when he spotted her, "I told you to stay at the house." "These are my cattle too," she called back, guiding her horse toward him. "What's the plan?" For a second, he looked like he might argue, but then his expression changed to one of grudging respect. "We need to get a rope across to that cottonwood," he pointed to a sturdy tree on the far bank, "but the current's too strong for the horses." Samantha studied the situation. "The old Miller's Bridge upstream, parts of it are still standing. I could cross there and come down the other side." "It's too risky, it's our only chance," she insisted. "I'm lighter than any of your men, the bridge will hold me." Yates stared at her, conflict clear in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Take Jones with you, and Samantha," he grabbed her reins, forcing her to look at him. "Be careful." The journey to the old bridge was treacherous, but Samantha and Jones made it. The wooden structure, abandoned after a flood years ago, still had its main support beams intact. Carefully, they crossed on foot, leading their horses through the pelting rain. Reaching the trapped cattle from the other side, they were able to secure ropes to the cottonwood and create a guide for the animals to follow to safety. One by one, the terrified beasts were led through the rising waters to higher ground. It was nearly dawn by the time the last cow was saved. Samantha was soaked to the skin and shivering with cold and exhaustion. As she helped corral the rescued animals, Yates rode up beside her. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of wonder. "Probably both," Samantha admitted, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Without another word, Yates reached over and pulled her from her saddle onto his horse, settling her in front of him. His body was solid and warm against her back, his arms secure around her as he held the reins. "The men can finish here," he said. "I'm taking you home." Back at the ranch, Yates insisted on carrying Samantha into the house despite her protests. He set her down only when they reached the bathroom, where he'd already instructed one of the hands to prepare a hot bath. "You need to get warm," he said, his voice gruff with concern. "I'll find you some dry clothes." When Samantha emerged from her bath, wrapped in a flannel nightgown and robe, she found Yates in the kitchen making coffee. He'd changed as well, his hair still damp from his own hasty wash. "You could have died out there," he said without preamble, pushing a steaming cup toward her. "So could you," she countered, accepting the coffee gratefully. "That's ranching, isn't it? You take risks." "Not with your life." His voice was fierce. "Never with your life, Samantha." The intensity of his concern caught her off guard. "Yates, I'm fine. We saved the cattle." "Damn the cattle." He slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. "Do you think I care more about livestock than I do about you?" The question hung in the air between them, revealing more than perhaps he'd intended. Samantha set down her cup carefully. "I didn't know what you cared about," she said softly. "We never discussed that part of our arrangement." Yates ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This isn't how I planned to tell you." "Tell me what?" He looked at her then, all his usual reserve stripped away. "That this stopped being just an arrangement for me weeks ago. That when I saw you on that bridge tonight, with the water rising and the storm raging, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake." Samantha felt her heart stutter. "A mistake?" "I shouldn't have married you for practical reasons," he said, moving closer to her. "I should have courted you properly." "Shown you that he broke off, seeming to struggle with the words. "That you what?" Samantha prompted, hardly daring to breathe. That I'm falling in love with you, Yates finished, his voice low and certain, and that I'm terrified you don't feel the same. The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Samantha stood frozen, trying to process the revelation that her husband, the man she'd married out of necessity, harbored genuine feelings for her. Say something, Yates urged after a long silence. Instead of speaking, Samantha closed the distance between them. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in a tentative kiss. For a moment, Yates remained still, as if afraid any movement would break the spell. Then, with a soft groan, he gathered her against him, deepening the kiss with a hunger that matched the storm outside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Is that your answer, part of it?" Samantha whispered. "The rest is that I think I might be falling in love with you too." I didn't expect to, but he kissed her again, cutting off her words. This time there was no hesitation, only the certainty of two people who had found something unexpected and precious. That night, for the first time, they shared a bed not for passion, though their kisses had kindled that flame, but for comfort and closeness after the terror of the storm and the revelation of feelings long suppressed. Samantha fell asleep with Yates's arms around her, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. In the weeks that followed, their relationship transformed. The courtship Samantha had requested began in earnest, though they were already married. Yates brought her wildflowers from the range, took her on picnics to his favorite spots on their combined properties, and each evening they shared their thoughts and dreams as they watched the sunset from the porch. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Word spread through the territory of the successful merger of the Fairfield and Fletcher spreads, and of the unusual couple who ran them. Some whispered about the hasty marriage, but such talk died down as it became apparent that the union was a happy one. Summer brought the cattle drive, a massive undertaking to move their combined herds to the railhead. Samantha insisted on riding alongside Yates and his men, proving herself every bit as capable as any cowhand. The nights around the campfire, under the vast Montana sky, brought them closer still, as they shared the work and rewards of the life they were building together. It was during the return journey from the railhead, with the profit from their cattle safely deposited in the bank, that trouble found them. A group of rustlers who had been plaguing ranches throughout the territory ambushed their small party as they made camp one evening. The first shot narrowly missed Yates as he tended the fire. Instantly alert, he shoved Samantha toward the cover of their wagon. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver, but Samantha had never been one to cower. Grabbing the rifle from their supplies, she took position behind a wheel, providing covering fire as Yates and their three hands engaged the attackers. The gunfight was brief but intense. When it was over, two rustlers lay dead, one was wounded, and the others had fled into the gathering darkness. But victory came at a cost. Yates had taken a bullet to the shoulder. "It's nothing," he insisted as Samantha examined the wound, her hands trembling but determined. "Went straight through." "Don't you dare minimize this," she snapped, fighting back tears as she cleaned and bandaged him as best she could with their limited supplies. "We need to get you to a doctor." The nearest town was still a day's ride away. Through the night, Samantha kept watch over Yates, cooling his forehead as fever set in, praying the wound wouldn't fester before they could reach help by dawn. Yates was delirious, his skin burning hot to the touch. Samantha made the decision to leave their remaining hand with the wounded rustler, while she and another cowboy transported Yates to town as quickly as possible. The journey was a nightmare. Every jolt of the wagon made Yates groan despite his semi-conscious state. Samantha rode beside him, one hand on the reins, the other gripping his good shoulder as if she could physically anchor him to this world. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not when I've just found you." They reached town by nightfall, and the local doctor was summoned immediately. As the physician worked on Yates's wound, Samantha paced the waiting room of the small clinic, replaying every moment of their relationship in her mind, the marriage of convenience that had become so much more. The quiet man who had saved her ranch and stolen her heart, the future they had begun to plan together, the children they might have, the legacy they would build. "Mrs. Fairfield," the doctor's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Your husband is asking for you." Yates lay pale against the white sheets, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his eyes were clear and alert when she entered. "There she is," he said, his voice weak but warm. "My wife who shoots like Annie Oakley." Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she rushed to his bedside. "You scared me half to death. I'm harder to kill than that." He reached for her hand with his good arm. "Doc says I'll mend just fine thanks to your quick action." "You better," she said, trying for sternness but failing as her voice broke, "because I'm not done with you yet, Yates Fairfield." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "I never doubted that for a minute." Recovery was slow. They remained in town for 2 weeks until the doctor deemed it safe for Yates to travel back to the ranch. During that time, Samantha rarely left his side, handling ranch business through messages and occasional visits from their foreman when necessary. It was in that small clinic room, with Yates confined to bed, and Samantha keeping him company through long days and nights, that they truly became husband and wife in every sense. They shared stories they'd never told anyone, confessed fears and hopes, and planned their future with a new awareness of how precious and precarious life could be. By the time they returned to the ranch, autumn was painting the landscape in golds and reds. Their home, for it was truly theirs now, not just Fletcher land or Fairfield property, welcomed them with the warm colors of the season. "I have something for you," Yates said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His arm was still in a sling, but he was gaining strength daily. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box. "I had this made in town while we were there." Samantha opened it to find a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Yates, we never had a proper engagement," he explained. "No ring, no courtship. I wanted to give you something that was just for us, not for practicality or survival, but because I love you." Tears filled Samantha's eyes as he took the ring and slipped it onto her finger alongside the simple gold band they'd exchanged at their hasty wedding months ago. "I love you," she whispered, the words still new and wonderful between them. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by early November. The cattle were safely in the lower pastures, the barns well stocked with hay, and the house snug against the cold winds that swept down from the mountains. It was during one such storm, with snow piling against the windows and the fire crackling in the hearth, that Samantha shared her news with Yates. "I think," she said carefully, watching his face, "that by next summer there will be 3 of us in this house." Yates stared at her for a long moment, comprehension dawning slowly. "You mean," Samantha nodded, a smile spreading across her face, "I'm going to have a baby." The joy that transformed his features was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Yates crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of delight that startled their dog from its slumber by the fire. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." As he held her, his hand gently cradling her still flat stomach, Samantha thought back to their wedding day and the tears that had fallen as she committed her life to a stranger. How different things were now, how completely her world had changed. "Do you remember what you said to me when we got married?" she asked, looking up at him. "When I was crying, that you'd never cry alone again," Yates recalled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've kept that promise," Samantha said softly, "even when the tears were happy ones." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Yates insisted on building a proper nursery, adding a room to their growing house just as their family was growing. Samantha sewed tiny garments and wondered about the child they had created. Would it have Yates's blue eyes or her chestnut hair? His quiet strength or her determination? Spring returned to the Montana territory, bringing new calves to their expanding herd and new growth to the land they tended together. Samantha's body changed with the season, her belly rounding as the baby grew within her. One warm evening in late May, almost exactly a year after the storm that had first brought them together as true partners, they sat on their porch swing, Yates's hand resting protectively over the child that kicked and tumbled beneath Samantha's heart. "I never thanked you," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. "For what? For saving me that day. For offering marriage when you could have just bought the land outright after the bank took it." Yates shook his head. "I didn't save you, Samantha. You saved yourself by having the courage to accept a future you hadn't planned. And then you saved me by turning a business arrangement into a real marriage." She leaned against him, content in a way she'd never imagined possible when she'd first returned to Montana, alone and afraid. "We saved each other, I think." "That's what partners do," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Their child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Samantha's mother was born in the heat of summer, with a pair of lungs that announced her arrival to the entire ranch. She had Yates's blue eyes and a tuft of hair that hinted at Samantha's chestnut shade, and from her first breath, she was the center of their world. As Samantha recovered from the birth, Yates proved himself as devoted a father as he was a husband. He would walk the floor with their daughter when she was fussy, sing her cattle songs in his deep voice, and look at her with an expression of such tender wonder that it made Samantha fall in love with him all over again. "She's perfect," he whispered one night as they stood together over the cradle watching their daughter sleep. "Just like her mother." "Hardly perfect," Samantha laughed softly, "but ours." "That's what makes her perfect," Yates insisted, wrapping his arm around Samantha's waist. "She's ours. This family we've made, it's everything I never knew to hope for." As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered around her. Yates and Samantha became known throughout the territory not just for their successful operation, but for their partnership. They made decisions together, faced challenges side by side, and built a reputation for fair dealing and hard work. Their family expanded again when Elizabeth was 3, with the birth of a son they named James after Yates's father. The house grew too, adding rooms and warmth as their lives filled with the chaos and joy of raising children on a working ranch. There were hard times, of course. Droughts that threatened their herds, winters so brutal they lost cattle despite their best efforts, economic downturns that made every penny count. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. 5 years after their hasty wedding, Yates surprised Samantha with a proposal, a second one. "Marry me again," he said one evening after the children were asleep. "Not out of necessity this time, but because we choose each other, knowing exactly what we're getting into." And so, on the anniversary of their first wedding, they exchanged vows once more. This time, the ceremony was held in the meadow behind their home, with Elizabeth as flower girl and James toddling behind her, clutching a small pillow with their rings. Friends and neighbors gathered to witness what everyone already knew, that what had begun as a marriage of convenience had become one of the greatest love stories in the territory. As they repeated their promises to each other, there were tears in Samantha's eyes again. But this time they were tears of joy, of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her to this moment. Yates, seeing those tears, smiled and whispered the words he'd spoken years before. "You'll never cry alone again." And in the decades that followed, as their children grew and the century turned, as their ranch became one of the most successful in Montana, as they faced joys and sorrows side by side, that promise remained unbroken. Through laughter and tears, through triumphs and trials, they faced life together, partners in every sense of the word. Their love story became legend in the territory, told and retold around campfires and at gatherings. The Eastern girl who'd returned to save her father's ranch, only to find herself marrying a cowboy she barely knew. The practical arrangement that had blossomed into deep and abiding love. The tears at a hasty wedding that had led to a lifetime of shared joy. And when visitors to their sprawling ranch would ask how they'd built such a life together, Yates would just smile and look at Samantha, his eyes still blue and keen despite the passing years. "We started with honesty," he'd say, "and built with trust." To which Samantha would always add, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing, "And we never let each other face anything alone." It was a simple philosophy for a love that had been anything but simple in its beginning, a love born of necessity but nurtured by choice. A love that had transformed 2 independent lives into one shared journey. A love that had begun with tears, but had brought more smiles than either could have imagined on that fateful day when a desperate young woman had married a lonesome cowboy and found not just salvation, but her heart's true home.